Good evening, everyone, or at least good almost evening. My name's Craig Scott. I'm a professor of law at Osgoode Hall Law School up at one of the other universities, where much of my career is spent around international, transnational law issues and human rights and democratic struggles worldwide, but also here in Canada. I also had the privilege to be a member of Parliament for Toronto Danforth for a few years, where I was the official opposition democratic reform critic. So I'm guessing that having one foot in politics and one foot in human rights and democracy advocacy and scholarship is why the organizers thought that maybe I could introduce the panel, and I very much appreciate the invitation. This panel on the current situation in Hong Kong, quite obviously, is not just topical, but it has multiple implications both for Canada and Hong Kong, Canada and China, and frankly, I think for the world. Now the panel's packed with knowledge, so it really is not for me to make any substantive comments at this stage, except for one, if you'll indulge me. What's going on in Hong Kong really does feel like it has world historical, to use an overused term, world historical significance by virtue of the remarkable demonstration of democracy as both a creative project and a courageous one. If you think of the street protests with the inspiring leadership of youth and the mastery of using social media not just to organize, but to generate something that feels like, looks like from abroad anyway, is a kind of spontaneous collective will. Think also of the almost jaw-dropping persistence of this movement we've seen for month after month after month after month that's lasted at least as long enough to create the bridges with the general population that we saw bear fruit only 3 days ago with the quite stunning results in the district council elections in Hong Kong. So just as we watched, just for example, but I think this is one of the leading examples around the world in this year, we watched the Sudanese democratic protests being driven by young people, including by young women. Just as we watched that with hope and awe, so with Hong Kong too. Now, I'll move on to introduce our panel, but first please permit me to urge everyone to allow this to be a constructive evening of learning and exchange. Some will have the urge, the very understandable urge, to interject while the panel is speaking. I know what it's like as a professor with students who do the same, but please show every respect and wait until the question and answer session that's specifically set aside for input so that you can convey your views. Now, a biography sheet has been circulated with detailed bios of everyone on the panel. If it hasn't made its way to you, parts of it are circulating, or you can borrow it from somebody sitting near you. So I'm just going to be very brief, a couple sentences on each of our panelists so that we can get going with a jolt. We're really lucky to have chairing and moderating this panel David Mulrooney. David's had a distinguished career in Canada's Foreign Service for something like 30 years, including quite recently as Canada's ambassador to the People's Republic of China from 2009 to 12. And recently, his book about Canada-China relations called Middle Power, Middle Kingdom, won the J.W. Defoe Prize in 2016. That's a prize for the best book on Canada and/or on Canada in the world. So it's quite the honor. Speaking first, and I'll start in no particular order after that, on the panel is Emily Lau. She is one of Hong Kong's most respected public figures, notably for her various leadership roles with the Democratic Party and her service for some almost 15 years in Hong Kong's Legislative Council, including being the first woman to be directly elected to LegCo. She's a recipient of major prizes such as the Bruno Kreisky Human Rights Award, and most recently she received an honorary doctorate from the London School of Economics only a few months ago. Victor Falkenhayn is a professor emeritus here at the University of Toronto. Professor Falkenhayn has for, it's going on 50 years, if I'm not mistaken, joined U of T somewhere in the early 70s. Has been a leading East Asian studies scholar. His work centers on local politics and political reform in China, and he's lectured extensively over the years in China. Lynette Ong, colleague Professor Falkenheim, is Associate Professor of Political Science here at U of T, and a much sought after expert on China, as she writes on authoritarian politics, and particularly of late, citizens' resistance in China and indeed elsewhere. Leading news outlets and foreign affairs or international affairs journals regularly publish her opinion pieces, and she's a familiar commentator on Canada's national news broadcasts. Kenneth Yao began his career as an engineer in China before immigrating to Canada, where he has for the last 5 years become a leading radio and TV host and guest commentator on a variety of outlets, ranging from Canadian Chinese radio to Fairchild Radio and TV to Chinese radio news. His willingness to engage in hard-hitting analysis of both Chinese and Canadian politics has made him one of the most important commentators in the city. And Vincent Wong should feel very much at home. He's the William C. Graham Research Associate for the University of Toronto Faculty of Law, where you are, their International Human Rights Program, where he also leads the law school's partnership in the Global Media Freedom Model Laws Project. Vincent's been a notable litigator, starting from the time he served as a staff lawyer at the Chinese and Southeast Asian Legal Clinic, and he's appeared before a range of influential decision-making bodies, from various UN human rights committees to the Supreme Court of Canada. There we have it, a really quite impressive panel. Without further ado, I hand over the proceedings to David Mulroney.
Thank you very much, Craig, for that introduction. Can everybody at the back hear me okay? We okay at the back? Great. I recall reading something a few years ago that former Premier Bob Rae said. He said that when he traveled to Hong Kong to give speeches to Hong Kong Canada associations, he felt that the audience was as informed about Canada and what was happening in Canada right at this very moment as any Canadian audience would be. And he always prepared very carefully for that Hong Kong audience. I think there's a sort of reciprocity in that what happens in Hong Kong resonates in a very powerful way in the city. It resonates personally for many. It resonates through the economy of the city. This is a city that has grown wealthy to an extent through its relationship with Hong Kong. It resonates through culture and education. Hong Kong is a place that Toronto knows fairly well and takes a keen interest in. And as we've been reminded on a daily basis, this is an exceptional time in Hong Kong's history. We're just a few days in the wake of very, very dramatic district council elections. We're coming up through months of democratic protests in the city. So we've gathered this really top-flight panel to try to help us understand what's happening in Hong Kong. What's the significance of it? What are the next steps, next likely steps? And what does it say about China's position in the world? How can we interpret what's going on in China through the lens of Hong Kong? We also then want to take a look in the second half of our discussion about the implications for Canada. How should Canada react to these events? What should we say and do? What's our stake? What's our role in these discussions? And importantly, how might China try to influence that debate right here in Canada? To get started, we're very, very fortunate to have Emily Lau with us. She's in Canada. She was in Canada to be part of the Halifax International Security Forum, where she, with another very special guest, who I will introduce a little bit later, was awarded the John McCain Prize for Leadership in Public Service. Now, in the wonderful media work that Emily's been doing since then, she has repeatedly said that that's an award for the people of Hong Kong, not for her, but I think it's an award for her too. And we've asked her to lead off with her impression of what's been happening, the significance, and possible next steps. So I turn over to Emily now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. And it's, ladies and gentlemen, it's really a pleasure and a great honor to be here this evening talking to you about Hong Kong and also, of course, about your country's policy on China and Hong Kong. And as David said, I arrived in Canada last week in Halifax to speak at the Halifax International Security Forum. And it's the first time I've been invited to speak there. And this year, they particularly invited me because one of the countries they wanted to talk about was China. And they invited me in August. And at that time, of course, the street protests in Hong Kong have already been filling the international media, TV, newspaper, and radio for months. And they wanted me to brief the audience on the Hong Kong perspective. And the Halifax Forum was attended by representatives from 80 countries. So it's quite a wide audience. And then, almost a week before the forum started, last week, they decided to award this, the John McCain Prize, as David just said, to the Hong Kong people. And they really wanted to, as a sign of support to the Hong Kong people, and asked me whether I would be happy to accept it, and because I would be in Halifax anyway. And I said, that's fine. But as you all know, in this movement, one hallmark is that no platform, no leaders, no representative. So how dare Emily Lau pick up the prize? So I said, well, I talked to my members of my party and others and say, hey, what should we do? They said, no. Don't collect it yourself. Otherwise, you're going to kick up a big row in Hong Kong with the protesters, and then the people giving you the prize will be very embarrassed. They thought to give it to encourage you, and then you have this big internal row. So anyway, so I went to the Civil and Human Rights Front, the body which is a coalition of the pro-democracy parties and groups, including my Democratic Party, and then they had a discussion and they nominated Figo Chan to come, and he's only 23, and you will hear from Figo later. So David, the thing is, as we speak, we are almost coming up to the 6th month of the protest, because if we count the big one, the big march was on the 9th of June, and we're now coming to the end of November, and then we get into December. So this thing has been going on for a long time, and it seems, and then people say, hey, aren't you people tired? I'm sure Figo is very tired. I'm tired. He's been breathing tear gas for weeks. His lungs are very tired and damaged too. But why is it that when you're so tired, you still carry on? And that's the fire inside the people. Not fire for independence. The Chinese propaganda machine will keep saying, oh, now these are the bastards who are fighting for independence, separatism. No, there may be some, very few, who want independence. Most of them want China to keep the promise of one country, two systems. That's in the Sino-British Joint Declaration of 1984, before many of you were born. And the year I asked Thatcher the question about moral responsibility. And then in 1997, Hong Kong was handed over to Chinese rule, and the people say they were very frightened about the communist rule. And before that, Deng Xiaoping, of course, was not alive to see the handover. But then Deng Xiaoping told the Hong Kong people, don't be afraid. Hong Kong will definitely be handed over to Chinese rule in 1997. But don't be afraid. The communists will not come to run Hong Kong. Why? Because under one country, two systems, the Hong Kong people will run Hong Kong, and Hong Kong will have a high degree of autonomy. You will keep the capitalist lifestyle, your freedoms, rule of law for 50 years until 1997, until 2047. But now we are only 22 years into this. And some journalists asked me, Ms. Lau, only 20-odd years left. I mean, more or less. I said, you've heard of the expression, in the long term, we're all dead. Why don't you die now? And that's the thing, the Hong Kong people refuse to die, now or in future. We are the David. We are fighting against the Goliath. But we are not afraid. And some young people have said, I carry the will in my pocket. I'm going to die. I have nothing to lose. And that's very sad. And we don't want people to die. But my dear friends, we want China to keep its promise. The people are so angry, the police are beating us up like that. We fear we have no more one country, two systems. We have no more high degree of autonomy. And the Chinese are interfering in Hong Kong affairs left, right, and center. And I speak as someone who still cannot travel to mainland China. I've been banned for 30 years. My alma mater gave me the honorary doctorate. I went to London to collect it. I said, but I cannot go to mainland China. And there are many mainland students studying at the LSE. I'm sure there are many studying here too, isn't it? I hope all the mainlanders would act in a civilized way. I've seen so many news coverage of mainlanders acting in a very, very barbaric manner. Whether it's in North America or in Europe, they shout down the Hong Kong students, they shout down the Hong Kong people. That's why I think David and Professor Scott said, let us have a civilized dialogue. I finish speaking, you will speak. But don't cause a big row. I don't think we want to call the police in tonight. The University of Toronto, that would be terrible. But David, I would need some more time to tell you what happened, but my time is almost up. I'm sure others would want to ask questions. But the fight is not over. We've won the election, only served for 4 years. If they don't do well, they will lose very badly next time. That's what democracy is all about. But we want China to keep the promise, lay off Hong Kong, give us high degree of autonomy, have an independent investigation to find out why Carrie Lam made such a big blunder, why we are facing the biggest crisis in Hong Kong's history, and why is it that the police are so brutal. So these are the things we have to address when I get home, when Figo get home. But I hope that when we get back to Hong Kong, we know that we have so many friends and supporters in Canada. So we will go back, embolden, empower, and continue our fight. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Emily. I'm going to do a quick round now with all the panelists, where I'm going to ask them, I'll ask them a particular question for each, but I'll also ask them to offer their sense of where this is going, where it's going for Hong Kong and where it's going for China. Before I do that, I want to circle back to Emily to ask her one more question in this round, and that is, she spoke about this incredible leaderless movement that is so cohesive, that comes together, that acts with a will at times, somewhat mysteriously, I think, to the government of Hong Kong and the government of China. But you've also talked about the 4-year mandate. And the Hong Kong Democrats have had that mandate before and haven't been able to make it work for them. Do you have confidence that over the next 4 years, given the voting of the district council elections, that they'll be able to act in a disciplined and concerted way?
Now, David, first of all, the district councils, I guess you also know, have no powers. It's just a consultative body. So, but I still hope that those people elected into office will really do a good job and discharge their responsibilities in a very, very diligent way. I say so because among those elected, there are more than 100 who are just people who have not taken part in politics before, and maybe they have joined the protest movement. I don't know whether they are really in the front line or second tier or whatever. So, but no matter what, we have to see, David, it remains to be seen. And I think most Hong Kong people, okay, they give you the vote, they put you in office, you took part in the protests, and the vote of the voters is a protest vote against Carrie Lam. And some have said so. They said, don't think I support the pro-democracy movement. I do not. But I'm against Carrie Lam. So I'm using my vote to tell her, okay, fine. But once you are an elected councillor, you've got to do the mundane work of a councillor. I have been in the Legislative Council for 25 years, 7 terms. I have never lost an election. And I know what it takes to be a very responsible member. You have to work hard. You have to really take your responsibilities seriously. And very often you're not in the limelight. When you're in the limelight, you're so happy. Most of the time you're not. You have to do hard work, do your homework, ask questions, make yourself unpopular because the rich and powerful may hate you. But that's what you have to do. So I hope, David, I don't know, because I probably don't know many of these newly elected people, but I hope that they understand the responsibility on their shoulder. It's not that, oh, people are protesting, they put us into office, so we just go in and protest every day. No, you can't. You can protest when protests are needed. But most of the time, you have to sit there diligently, attend the meetings, ask questions, and take part in debates. And some may not want to, because if you don't work hard, you speak, you immediately show how shallow you are, how ignorant you are. People are not stupid. You open your bloody mouth. People will know whether you've done homework or not. You know, you don't have to, you know your own politicians. When they open their mouths, you know, have they done their homework? But we all know. Voters all over the world are not idiots. So the same in Hong Kong. And I give you a chance. If you let me down, next time you are out. And that's how it should be. That's democracy, David. So I can't answer you. I hope they will not let the people down, those who voted them into office. But there's a risk. So we have to, let us hope, Figo, you go back and tell the young people to
Thank you, Emily. I'm going to go to the far end of the panel, and I can just about see her, and that's President Annette Ong, who is someone whose scholarship has focused on a number of really important things, and I think a very pioneering thing. One of the things that Lynette has focused on in her scholarship and in her travels and research are the topics of modes of citizen resistance and, on the other side of that coin, modes of state control. So I want to ask her about what she's seen through that lens in Hong Kong. Anything new, anything different? And then I want to ask her to address that question of where do things go from here in her estimation. So Lynette, please.
So are we in the wrong tune?
Yes.
So I want to thank David for that very poignant question. And I want to take this opportunity to address a couple of dimensions of morality, pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong, which is, in a way closely related to the question that David has posed and related to my own research. So in the way that the movement in the last 6 months has evolved, I think to me the very first turning point was on July 21st, when a bunch of ordinary citizens just coming back from a hard day's work were attacked by thugs at Yuen Station. That to me sparked a major moral outrage. While we are not exactly clear who ordered the attack, it is quite clear that that was a bit of a turning point, because after that, we saw people from all walks of life, including lawyers, financial sector workers, mothers, coming out to protest to support the movement. So, I think morality and moral outrage has a lot to play to that. I could say more. There's also a lot of issue. There's a lot of debate about morality of violence in this protest. And I think there are two sides to the coin. There are really two sides to the coin. And I'm happy to come back to this point later. Where do I see the movement goes. I think this is this has to be a sustained movement, because we are generally fighting a big Goliath. I would like to think this is not the battle of Hong Kong people alone, which is why I think the morality of violence is so crucial.
Thank you, and we will come back to that. Kenneth, I'd like to ask you. I'd like to offer Lynette just a quick response as to where do you think this goes from here?
Well, the way I see it, it went from institutional politics to street politics, which is lack of universal suffrage in Hong Kong election, the election for the position of chief executive. That was unsatisfactory as far as Hong Kong people are concerned. So they take their grievances to the street. And then that wasn't successful at the beginning with use of peaceful marches. And they escalated violence to grab attention. And then that was in turn feedback into the landslide victory for the pro-democracy camp in a very recent district election. So now we have that played back to institutional politics. With this landslide victory, we would expect the government to do something. It hasn't really responded. So I think the ball is now passed back to the protesters. Protesters can take it one way or the other. But the most ideal situation would be for the government to respond to the election results. So quite clearly that the people have spoken one way or the other.
Thank you. Kenneth, in addressing the question of where does this go, I'd also ask you to offer some insights into the role of media, both domestic media in Hong Kong, Chinese state media, and international media in this series of events. Would you like Jeff to?
Yeah, let me introduce my friend Jeff. He will be my interpreter. Yeah, thank you.
This we won't start your official presentation until a little bit later. Okay. So this is really your sense of the role of media in the protests. Yeah.
你對傳媒方面喺呢個運動裏邊覺得佢哋做成點？香港嘅傳媒或者外國嘅傳媒？
而家啲傳媒咧，基本上染晒色㗎啦，而家無論係香港，抑或係加拿大，我覺得都因為有啲經濟嘅原因，或者係一啲政治立場嘅原因，而多多少少都染成咗粉紅色或者紅色甚至。
Kenneth's view is the media in Hong Kong and perhaps in some other countries, because of the infiltration in economics and politics, the reporting of some outlets may not be entirely truthful, but is tainted with their own political stance.
And the influence of China's state media?
中國裏邊嘅自己嘅傳媒嘅影響係如何？
我覺得中國裡面嘅傳媒影響其實就唔係好大。譬如我講嘅唔係好大，就話其實根本上我哋係成個西方世界入邊植入咗依家呢個時候咧，我哋譬如我哋加拿大本土嘅傳媒本身都有好多中國元素喺入邊。好簡單就攞我喺嗰度工作嗰啲傳媒入邊咧，如果係我講啲嘢係唔啱聽嘅話，係好有可能咧係俾一啲廣告客戶啦，譬如話我唔啱聽呢個人講啲嘢，或者咩啲cut一啲 budget 啊，cut 啲廣告費啊，咁令到呢度啲media 咧都好有可能抽起我哋講嘅節目。
The media who lean towards the Central Communist Party in Canada would sometimes cut their budgets for advertising in the business that Canada's in if for some reason he reports any news that is considered unfavorable by the Chinese Communist Party. So in a way, their infiltration is on the economic power that they can exert and control the message.
呢個亦都係一陣間我哋個講到嘅所謂中國嘅大外宣計劃啊。
This we shall elaborate later in what we call the big propaganda program, 大外宣, which is started by the Communist Party since 2009.
基本上呢啲影響咧，其實去到好多層面，當然亦都包括所有嘅傳媒。
Infiltrating into different levels of our lives, including the media.
Thank you very much. We'll have a chance to hear more from Kenneth on this subject when we get into the second half of things. I'm going to turn to Professor Falkenheim now and ask him to take a China-wide perspective and to see if he could tease out for us how the Hong Kong events, what the Hong Kong events tell us about the leadership of Xi Jinping and the direction that China would like to drive Hong Kong in. It's been a very difficult week for Xi Jinping. Major document dump out of Xinjiang illustrating the extent of Chinese repression in the far west. District council elections in Hong Kong. Is Xi Jinping likely under pressure in Beijing? And what's next for him?
Thank you for that.
You have 30 seconds for that.
Thank you for the question, and obviously I have no more insight into Xi Jinping than probably anyone else on this panel or this room. But if I had to, in fact, speculate, I think he will double down on the policies that are in place in Xinjiang and the domestic policies of repression that have been developing since 2012 and certainly more recently. So I'm not hopeful that the Chinese government will carry them any more room to negotiate some kind of compromise solution. I would imagine that within the senior leadership there must be a fair amount of criticism and grumbling going on. China's its reputational status has been seriously damaged by recent revelations in Xinjiang and by the focus now on the rigidity of their policies in Hong Kong. But I think one of the questions is what message will Xi Jinping and the Chinese leadership take from the district council elections? And I think rather than sort of seeing it as as a call for further or as an impetus to further reform, they'll simply see the kind of accumulating threat of kind of identity politics in Hong Kong as a long-term threat, to any solution, and I think they will sort of double down. I hope that's not the case. Benny Tai had a piece in the New York Times today or yesterday, sort of reflecting on the district council elections, and he was hopeful that the increased kind of leverage and resources of the pro-democracy movement would allow for a negotiated settlement or some form of compromise. And I certainly hope that is the case. But my general view would be less optimistic than that.
Thank you, Greg. I'm going to jump over Emily to go to Vince. And in asking Vince a question, I want to come back to something that Lynette mentioned, which is the moral dimension. And one of the things that we've been seeing in international responses has been a kind of a painful and awkward attempt to draw a degree of moral equivalence, to say we want both sides to back down, as if this is a balancing act between two equally and powerful actors. How do you look at that? How do you look at the levels of violence that you're seeing? What is justifiable in terms of political resistance? What lines have been crossed, if any?
Sure, thank you very much, David. I think, and you're right, what this kind of equivalency of violence on both sides is hitting on is the actual difficulty of protesting police brutality and impunity for state violence anyway, right? Because pretty much what happens when you have an unaccountable police force that is constantly violating international guidelines with legal impunity is people will come up and be very angry and will protest. And if the only kind of option is to kind of beat them down with more police brutality, with new kind of weapons, 10,000 plus tear gas canisters, you will see people at some point say, what is the point of us taking a beating like good children? Human rights are for everyone, right? Not just given as some sort of royal bounty. And so people will eventually sort of resist. But you're right in that that creates some issues, right? And particularly kind of one kind of ethos in the Hong Kong protests is to not split, to not throw anybody under the bus, no matter how much you disagree with their particular tactics. And this, unfortunately, I think, does lead to situations where actions that need to be condemned are not, fully kind of condemned. But the violence on both sides, the other thing that it does is it kind of obfuscates the political nature of the root causes. So is it going to be the case that every single time we oppose one law in Hong Kong, you have to drag 1 million people to the streets, 2 million people to the streets? You need to endure 3 months of police beatings and have 4,000 people arrested just to change one law every single time? So, what is that kind of state violence equivalency in a rigged society? That's, I think, the question on a lot of people's minds.
Thank you. I want to ask Emily, as someone who has been on the front lines for a long time, what's happened to the Hong Kong police force? And is that emblematic of what's happened to a lot of Hong Kong institutions? Has it been infiltrated? Has it been transformed into something that is more like a police force in mainland China?
I think, David, you're right that I think many institutions in Hong Kong have been infiltrated. Just like many institutions in Canada or in Australia and other places have been infiltrated. That's what the communists are good at. And I think they started infiltrating Hong Kong many, many decades ago. So whether it's in government, in universities, in the banks, among the professionals, they're all there. And at the right moment, they will emerge. And some of the Communist Party members, David, I'm sure you know, they have a duty. They will never publicly emerge. It's their duty to be, somebody lying there will never reveal their identity as a party member. So it's true. I think that nobody would be surprised that the police, and actually I think it was in the 1950s, it was found that a police officer was actually from the mainland, and he was sent back, and he was arrested. So it's not funny. I mean, it's not strange that they have been infiltrated. But it is quite dreadful to see the police officer, which used to have a very high reputation. We have quite a number of discipline services, the police, ICAC, fire service, prisons, flying service, and so on. And at some stage, the police was number one, that the people respect and trust. And now, of course, they're at the pits. So why is it? I mean, have they been fed some drugs or something? Why did they turn so violent? And I think like Carrie Lam and others, I think they are mentally, there must be something wrong. Well, if you are trapped in that state, I guess you would be too, isn't it? Have to be on the streets every day fighting, and you cannot, you can't even go to the toilet. You have to always be on the street doing it. And you can't go out when you are days off. Because if you go, oh, you are the police! Wow, and your kids, all of those things, put all on the social media. Where you were born, where you go to school, it's terrible. And to be surrounded by that sort of thing, it's not surprising you become paranoid or something. So it is very, very sad that they are faced with that, and also the Hong Kong people. So why is it that things have degenerated into that state? So I think we really need some academics, some experts to study. Is it human nature that when you are thrown into that path, then your most ugliest nature will emerge? And you don't care whether it's kids or whatever, you just beat them up, you shoot at them. Well, it's terrible, David. So we don't know why the police has morphed into that monster in the last few months. And some people say it may take decades to rebuild the trust between the public and the police. And that's awful. So how do we pick up from here? And maybe Canada can help. If you have experts here who have, no, don't stop shaking your head. The thing is, I think if in the international community, if there are friendly countries who have expertise in dealing with such police brutality and all that, can help Hong Kong to see how we salvage the situation. And now what the protesters want, they want to disband the police force. And if you go to a city without police, what do? You may feel very, very nervous. So what do we do? It's a big, big problem. And can this commission of inquiry help? Maybe it can. We hope it can. But we need to come up with the expertise, the really professional knowledge, that people have dealt with it, they know how to help and to make good suggestions, and these are people who have integrity. Most important now. Integrity, and you have the know-how, and you're willing to go and help us to sort it out. And we don't even know whether you can, but at least we've got to make a try. So it is very, very sad. And the police, 30,000 odd of them, how come suddenly become like pariah? It's really very dreadful. I just cannot answer your question.
You have in large part, and I think this question about the state of Hong Kong institutions, year after year, the possibility of decline or corrosion from within, is something that's very worrying. And it leads to another question, and I'll offer that up to see if anybody wants to tackle it, and that is part of the problem a changing perception from Beijing of Hong Kong's relative importance? That Beijing was willing to live up to fairly ambitious commitments while it saw an independent, prosperous Hong Kong as a window on a rather closed society as beneficial. And if they no longer see that, and they see Hong Kong as just another city in the Pearl River Delta area and possibly a somewhat annoying competitor to places like Shanghai, that any will they had to live up to the Deng Xiaoping vision has vanished. Vic made that statement. That's an open question. On my eyes. I'm going to go him first.
I mean, I think is the heart of trying to gauge Beijing's ultimate calculus. I mean, you see reports in the press. I'm not competent to evaluate them, about the still critical financial role that Hong Kong plays, for the mainland and for many of the Chinese, leading sort of oligarchs, if you like, and business interests. But otherwise, I think the utility of Hong Kong is diminishing over time. The GDP of Shenzhen already exceeds that of Hong Kong, and the dangers that would, I think, the regime that would be posed by a sort of democratic Hong Kong, those political dangers would outweigh any sort of economic benefits to be gained. But I think central to this whole issue is the calculations that are being made in Beijing, the strategic, calculations. Hopefully, it seems to me just to draw attention to, it seems to me, a significant change in the most recent decade. In 2003, 500,000 people in the streets, stopped the Article 23 from being legislated. 2010, 2012, Hong Kong governments were responsive, in fact, to popular mobilization in the streets. So what's happened in the last decade? Is it Xi Jinping? Is it China? Or is it the emergence of a kind of challenging Hong Kong identity that is seen as posing a threat? If Beijing really wanted to sort of figure out how to manage this, they simply have to look back to 2003, 2010, and I, as many of you have, I participated in every July 1st protest going back, to 1997, and I was there during the riots in 1967. And there's a kind of equilibrium, kind of only limited political mobilization in the streets, and a government that knows how to manage that. And whether they've lost the ability or the flexibility to manage in a stable way, I'm not sure, but it's a very sort of sad spectacle.
Thank you, Nick.
Take a shot at that question there about the changing relative importance of Hong Kong in sort of a neoliberalist world. Hong Kong is a very interesting place because traditionally it's sort of the hub and the interface between Chinese state authoritarian capitalism and kind of Western neoliberalist laissez-faire sort of capitalism. So it's kind of that interface, and it still, to a very large extent, acts as that sort of hub. If you think about foreign domestic investment, lots of Chinese firms want to IPO in Hong Kong to get access to foreign currency. And while the relative importance of Shenzhen and Shanghai are growing, it still has a very important role to play. Here's the problem, though. That's trending in a difficult direction. And then so if Hong Kong is no longer that important in kind of the global neoliberalist world, then what is it, right? Because there are also costs to this. Hong Kong is the #1 region in the developed world in terms of the Gini coefficient, so income inequality. It is the #1 in the world in terms of price for housing per square foot. It has a 20% kind of poverty rates, even though it's a very rich country. And so these kind of issues are starting to kind of take place. And it's difficult to answer that question but Hong Kong the society is starting to kind of change through these protests, and it's trying to see if there's a way for it to exist without sort of the traditional trappings of being a port between these two kind of competing examples of global capitalism.
And it would require an exceptionally enlightened China to allow that to work itself out, which is what we're not seeing right now. I'm going to go back to Lynette just to pick up on the sort of moral dimension again, and that question of, as Vince said, if it takes mobilizing 1 million people to change a law, if it takes going to the streets and increasingly brutal police response through the decades, what is permissible in terms of protest? And what level of protest is justifiable? Is there a line that gets crossed?
So, if I could just come back to the question that you posed earlier, so before this one. Can you hear me?
Kenneth is an electrical engineer.
Anyway, so I wanted to return to an earlier question that David posed. I think there are two sides to the coin, and I get the view that the importance of Hong Kong to mainland China might be eroding over time. But imagine if you're an institutional investor, a hedge fund investor, or someone who wants to trade renminbi in offshore market. I think these are the things that none of the mainland Chinese cities, Shenzhen or Shanghai, could actually replace Hong Kong that easily. Why? Because I think until very recently, the rule of law still held up very, very well in Hong Kong. And I think that is very unique comparative advantage vis-a-vis other Chinese cities. And I think above everything else that Hong Kong people have been fighting for in the last 6 months, it is really the rule of law, right? That really matters. China could then go and build the Great Bay Area. There will be complementarity between different cities, and some of the industries and services that have been conducted in Hong Kong, I'm sure some of that would relocate to Shenzhen because of lower cost and proximity to domestic market. But rule of law, as long as the political system in China doesn't change, Hong Kong will still have this comparative advantage. And mind you that people talk about how Singapore might benefit from the chaos in Hong Kong, but Singapore is no perfect substitute. We know what sort of political system is operating in Singapore. And London is another close competitor, but London is so far away. So, about morality of protests. If David could allow me to read a paragraph from the novelist Haruki Murakami. So he said that if there's a hard, high wall and an egg that breaks against it, no matter how right the wall or how wrong the egg, I will stand on the side of the egg. Why? Because each of us is an egg, a unique soul enclosed in a fragile egg, and each of us is confronting a high wall. And the high wall is the system that forces us to do things we would not ordinarily see fit to do as individuals. We are all human beings, individuals, fragile eggs. We have no hope against the wall. It is too high, too dark and too cold. To fight the wall, we must join our souls together for warmth and strength. And we must not let the system control us, create who we are. It is we who created the system. And let me use an even simpler analogy of David versus Goliath. A few Davids here, but not, you know which David I'm referring to. When a David picked up a brick to defend himself in his fight against Goliath, can we blame David for doing so? I would think not, because it is an unfair game to start with. But when David picked up a wall in his battle against other Davids, and I think that puts the morality of violence in a different dimension. However few or isolated these incidents are, I think it is important, and it is technically very important to pay attention to the question of morality of violence. It is of technical significance. It is of even more importance in terms of the sustainability of the movement. In a leaderless movement where resources is limited, when you have, I often tell my students, what makes a social movement? You need ingredients A to K to bake a cake. But in the case of Hong Kong, you miss half of the ingredients, right? And to sustain a movement, you need David in plural terms. You need David in heterogeneous group. And you need Davids in different skin tones, which is why morality of violence, I think, is so crucial.
Thank you, thank you for the Murakami quote. And you touched on something that leads us into the second part of our discussion, which is that question of broader solidarity. that in an unequal battle like this, the Davids also need some support within Hong Kong society, but also beyond that. And a lot of folks in this room, or at least some folks in this room, are old enough to remember the lead up to 1997 here in Canada. And it was a time when the UK and China were both looking for international support for the deal that they had agreed to, for very different reasons. And the UK, particularly through the personal leadership of Chris Patten, was looking for a certain kind of support. And it was support from the West saying, we support the deal you've done as a deal that promises Hong Kong a high degree of autonomy, promises support for important Hong Kong institutions, and looks to support democratic development in Hong Kong. And Canada's voice was sought at that time, and Canada delivered. To the extent that Chris Patten wrote a note to our then commissioner in Hong Kong, now it's effectively the Consul General, saying, thank you, Canada, for all the commitments we made. Somehow, between then and now, we were suffering a degree of amnesia, because our current statements lack some of that ringing declarative power. Emily has reminded us during her visit through her media that the only place, if you're looking for finding a record of how many foreign statements have been issued, you should ask the briefer at China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because they have an uncanny ability to tell you what was 67 yesterday, it's 68 today, because it matters. It means something. So let's talk a little bit about that broader sense of solidarity and what should be expected of a country like Canada. To lead off, I know Kenneth has prepared some thoughts on how much more complicated the situation is now with a much more powerful China and a China that's not afraid to reach right into Canadian society to shape how we discuss these things. So I'm going to turn it over to Kenneth, and with the help of Jeff, to get us going.
Yeah, Jeff. I talk about infiltration today. Okay. Test. 各位朋友，今日我哋嚟講一講滲透。
Ladies and gentlemen, today I would like to share some of my views on infiltration in Canada.
滲透喺中國人社會由來已久啦，官商平民之間往往以交情同埋搞關係嚟達到某啲目的嘅，而呢啲做法咧，直接個後果就係往往係你中有我，我中有你，關係係相互利用同埋相互滲透嘅。
Infiltration has long existed in Chinese society. People in all levels of society achieve goals through relationships with others. They make friends and make use of friends, exchanging favors they can provide through their authority or place in society for benefits that can be provided by the purview of others. This culture has resulted in a uniquely intertwined social system.
就目前中國大陸對外政策而言呢，呢一種情況相對地好嚴重啊！因為大陸近幾年推行嘅大外宣計劃呢，佢目的就係向全世界宣傳佢嘅嗰個各種進步啦。 同埋呢種宣傳亦都包括佢價值觀嘅傳播，特別喺習近平上台之後咧，呢種情況咧變得更加急進同埋廣泛深入嘅。
Through ongoing diplomatic and cultural exchange with mainland China, this situation today has become serious. China's propaganda campaign promotes the progress of China to foreign countries in different areas of the world, but delivers Chinese core values at the same time. The movement has become broader, deeper, and more aggressive with the rise of Xi Jinping's government.
自04年開始，中國大陸咧以孔子學院作為文化交流項目，公派教師到西方各國宣傳大陸官方認為係正面嘅信息。佢利用強大嘅經濟能力去影響當地嘅文化同埋學術。雖然好多年以嚟咧遭到多個學校同埋多個國家嘅取締，多倫多教育局亦都喺14年終止咗同佢合作。 但係隨住中國移民嘅增多同埋自費中國留生嘅劇增，呢種滲透情況越嚟越嚴重。
Since 2004, China introduced the Confucius Institute as a cultural exchange program, sending teachers to different countries promoting a positive image of Chinese values, while using its powerful economic power to influence local culture and academics. Although the program has been banned by many cooperating countries and universities over the years, including the Toronto District School Board, who also terminated its cooperation with Confucius Institute in 2014, the increase of Chinese immigrants and large numbers of self-financed Chinese visa students has made infiltration increasingly serious.
以香港為例，每日從大陸移居嘅香港人數係150人，自97回歸至今22年呢，已成110萬人㗎。加上每日去大陸由大陸咧去香港旅遊啦，同埋過境嘅人數咧，已足夠滲透到香港各行各業，甚至乎各級嘅政府機關，對香港嘅文化、民生以至政治世態都造成巨大嘅影響。
In Hong Kong, for example, 150 people officially moved to Hong Kong from mainland China every day since 1997. That is a population of 1.2 million after 20 years of unification, 22 years of unification. With the addition of daily travelers from mainland China, the number is big enough to infiltrate into all types of business, all levels of government organizations, making a huge impact in Hong Kong's culture, lifestyle and political stance.
喺加拿大，特別喺多倫多，隨住移民人數嘅增多，漸漸出現好似香港咁嘅情況，即民生同埋政治形態咧都受到不斷嘅影響。呢種情況喺3級政府選舉嗰陣時就更加清晰可見啦。而且隨住入籍同埋可以投票嘅人數不斷嘅增加，呢種情況會越嚟越嚴重。
In Canada, especially in Toronto, with the increased number of immigrants, a similar situation like Hong Kong has occurred. Our lifestyles and political atmosphere is constantly changing. This phenomenon is clearly visible in the 3 levels of elections. As more immigrants become voters, the situation will become more critical.
據報道咧，溫哥華一間中學嘅中文課程，一位來自中國大陸嘅教師，不但引導學生睇到極具中國共產黨意識形態嘅電影《我和我的祖國》，並要求學生講電影嘅觀後感同埋討論點解要熱愛佢哋嘅祖國。我相信當中有部分喺加拿大出世嘅學生咧，被灌輸咗一種咁嘅概念，就係中國先至係佢哋唯一嘅祖國，而唔係佢哋出生國加拿大。
According to the news, a middle school teacher in Vancouver who came from mainland China introduced a movie filled with Chinese Communist Party ideology called My People, My Country to her students, and asked her students to express their feelings of the movie, discussing why they have to love their motherland. I believe some of the students born in Canada were implanted with the concept that China is their motherland instead of Canada their country of birth.
喺一次多倫多香港華人支持香港反送中運動入邊呢，因為電台工作嘅需要，我就參加咗成個過程。之後喺電台同埋社交媒體上就我所見呢，就講到呢，全程並沒有人提到港獨訴求。事後收到咗相信係來自於中國大陸國語社群嘅人士對我全家嘅死亡恐嚇，以及對支持我嘅朋友嘅恐嚇，又話要強姦佢個女啦。咁唔係好耐咧，我就喺訪談節目入邊就質問一個親近中共嘅人士咧，點解喺擁有加拿大價值觀嘅同時，仲可以認同中共呢個完全對立嘅價值觀？之後我就受到各方嘅攻擊啦。咁好快我就離開咗電台同埋電視台嘅時事評論工作。具體嘅情況大家可以參考下19年10月8號 National Post 嘅專訪。
In a Toronto, Hong Kongers in support of the Anti-Extradition Law Amendment Bill movement in Hong Kong, I attended the whole process as a part of my work and reported on radio and social media what I saw. There was no mention of Hong Kong independence. There was no mention of Hong Kong independence in the entire process. Later, I received death threats to me and my family from whom I believe were amongst the mainland China Mandarin community. My friend who supported me also received intimidation saying her daughter will be raped. Later, during a radio show, I sharply questioned someone who had strong ties to the Chinese Communist Party. How could he embrace simultaneously both Canada's values and the antagonistic values of the Chinese Communist Party. Immediately, I received attacks from all sides, and shortly I had to leave my commentary positions on television and radio. For details, please refer to the National Post October 8, 2009 interview.
另一個個案呢，係中國駐多倫多總領事韓滔先生，曾於19年2月16號呢，正月12日，率領呢個僑務組嘅工作人員呢，去到多倫多華人團體聯合總會，簡稱華聯會，進行呢個新春團拜同埋工作指導。當中有華聯會嘅成員同埋多倫多中文媒體嘅成員。我好好奇啦，呢一個工作指導究竟係乜嘢嘅工作，係乜嘢嘅指導？眾所周知，華聯會成員咧為華人社區嘅領袖同埋一啲華資企業嘅老闆啊、高層管理人員啦，呢啲人咧加上埋中文嘅傳媒成員咧，佢影響真係好大嘅。咁呢啲人喺接受咗領事嘅工作指導之後咧，會對華人社區造成啲乜嘢嘅影響？
The Consul General of the People's Republic of China in Toronto, Mr. Han Tao, on February 16, 2019, the 12th day of the Lunar New Year, led his staff visiting the Confederation of Toronto Chinese Canadian Organizations, CTCCO, for Chinese New Year celebrations and a work guidance meeting. In attendance were members of CTCCO and Chinese media in Toronto. I'm very curious what this work guidance refer to. What kind of work? What sort of guidance? It is widely known the members of CTCCO are mostly Chinese community leaders, proprietors, and senior management of a few Chinese-funded enterprises. When these people, combined with Chinese language media, act as community voices, the influence should not be underestimated. After receiving work guidance from the Consul General, what kind of impact will occur on the Chinese community?
最近我仲睇見一則關於某加拿大華人超市引入呢個人面支付系統嘅報導。我個人對呢一個系統嘅數據儲存同埋保安措施懷有極大嘅保留態度，特別係睇到報道入邊呢，超市呢個負責人啊，亦都喺以上提到嘅韓滔總領事嘅工作指導會面嘅大合照入邊出現。 更加係令到我對呢一個超市掌握咗顧客嘅資料產生咗極大嘅不安。
I saw a report of a Canadian Chinese supermarket chain wanting to introduce a human facial recognition payment system. I personally have great reservations for the data storage and security measures of this system, especially when I saw the face of the person in charge of the supermarket appear in the group picture of the above-mentioned work guidance meeting with Mr. Han Tao. It makes me extremely uncomfortable to imagine personal data going through this supermarket chain.
喺呢度補充一下啦，圖上邊呢個有個白頭髮嘅，就係我哋電視台嘅其中一個主持嚟嘅，佢去北京嘅一個閱兵儀式啊。
The gentleman I pointed to, the picture on the top left-hand corner, second person from the right, the tallest person with the white hair is
我哋電台嘅同事。
Kenneth's past colleague at the station.
好啦，最後我哋傾一傾咧，我哋喺生活層面，最近呢幾年雖然我會身處加拿大，但喺公眾場所批評中國政府嗰陣時都變得好小心翼翼㗎。 去酒樓飲茶啦，去超市購物啦，甚至乎喺教會都慎防隔牆有耳，既擔心附近紅粉嘅謾罵或者襲擊，更加擔心言論咧被收錄去某啲機構，如喺 Facebook 之類嘅社交媒體，好多朋友讀到反對中共嘅言論嗰時，即使同意亦都唔敢點讚，擔心惹麻煩，而且呢一種恐懼咧亦直接影響到我哋喺大陸嘅親朋戚友啦嚇。 怕我哋講咗對中共不利嘅言論咧，被傳輸到中國大陸而連累到佢哋嘅。
Finally, let's get into our everyday life. In recent years, even though we are in Canada, we have become cautious if we try to criticize the Chinese government in public, in restaurants, shopping in supermarkets, even in the church. We find ourselves guarding against eavesdroppers, worries of verbal or even physical assault from nearby pro-Beijing fans. as well as worrying our conversations might be recorded by certain agencies. On social media like Facebook, with regards to articles criticizing the Chinese Communist Party, a lot of people hesitate to express their opinions, feelings, or even click an emoji for fear of getting into trouble. This fear also extends to our friends and relatives in mainland China. If we make unfavorable remarks about the Chinese Communist Party here in Canada, our remarks here could be transmitted to mainland China, causing trouble for them there.
我衷心咁希望加拿大聯邦移民部咧喺制定移民政策嗰陣時，能夠以今日香港嘅沉淪作為借鑑，充分考慮到呢一種滲透力對日後加拿大喺政治、經濟、民生、文化等各種影響，應該好似美國一樣，盡快制定一個加拿大對香港工作指導嘅法案。
I sincerely hope, when formulating immigration policy, Canada can use Hong Kong's deterioration today as a lesson to fully consider the impact of this infiltration on Canada's future politics, economy, lifestyle, and culture, and moreover, like the United States, formulate a Canada towards Hong Kong work guidance bill as soon as possible.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kenneth, and thank you for your personal testimony and your personal courage. I think you get to the context within which we discuss the next issue, and that is how Canada should respond. But one of the things you point to is a discussion that's happening in Australia, New Zealand, the United States, and elsewhere. I think from a Canadian context, in addition to affecting how we look at foreign policy issues, it also challenges us to deal with very real pressures and very real threats, but in ways that do not undermine our values in terms of inclusiveness and being a welcoming society, and a society where immigrants can come in, become part of Canadian society and succeed. So it really, the insidious part of it is it can challenge the best part of what Canada is all about. And I think we all have to work hard to make sure that we meet the challenge, but in ways that are entirely in line with the very best things that we have stood for. You mentioned the Consul General in Toronto providing guidance. It's been kicked up the line a little bit because we've also now received guidance from the ambassador. And the ambassador has warned us not to dare consider something that the United States has done, which is the passing of the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, which contains a number of measures that would get right at problem areas in terms of Hong Kong's autonomy, would identify people who are working against human rights in Hong Kong and freeze their assets, refuse them access to the United States, and would, on the flip side, open the doors of the United States to those who have been on the front line of the democracy movement. So we've been warned not to do that, and generally when China warns you not to do something, that's often a good thing to start considering. So I'm going to do another panel, set of panel questions, starting this time with Vince on my right, and ask you for your suggestions as to what it is that Canada should be doing.
Sure, thanks David, and thanks Kenneth for sharing your personal story. I'm really sorry in terms of the threats that you and people around you have faced. I did want to pick up on one of your final points though, which is the importance of separating the people from the government, okay? And that's like, it's true everywhere. I mean, we have many governments in the world who are engaging in kind of repressive state practices. It is really important not to tag individuals by guilt by association. So for instance, Hong Kong in its history has always been a refugee hub for what is going on in the mainland. So yes, there of course has been great migration post-1997 from the mainland into Hong Kong, but that is, kind of par for course. But the problem, of course, is the insidiousness of your United Front war campaign. And a kind of a balance has to be struck here, especially with respect to kind of the Chinese international students here at U of T. We have a duty here as an academic institution to make sure those folks are safe, and that an academic environment builds bridges of communication and freedom of expression, that we have a space to discuss this and to build a common understanding that is very, very difficult at home. So I just wanted to start quickly with that. In terms of some of the policy responses that the Canadian government could be considering, I think right up at the top of the list is imposing export controls, denying access to equipment and technologies that could be used to violate human rights, right? So this includes, of course, crowd control, equipment and ammunition, arms exports, of which there is actually significant arms export to the Hong Kong police, of which the government, Canadian government, has not given us full information about, as well as digital surveillance technologies, given what is going on in China. And so, other than imposing export controls on those issues, greater consular assistance, right? I mean, particularly for those who are arrested and detained, we have 300,000 Canadians, citizens who are in Hong Kong. That's more Canadians anywhere in the world other than the US, by far. And so the obligations that we have, especially for those who are detained, are significant, and we need to be following up on that, and the staff need to be given the resources in order to do that. And the final thing I would say is, we should probably consider some IRCC, some immigration kind of guidelines to be drafted on the situation of Hong Kong protesters who may be in a situation to claim asylum under a well-founded fear of persecution on the grounds of political opinion. So probably those internal guidelines with respect to asylum for those who are political prisoners or facing kind of political persecution, that's something that immigration should think about. But again, with the caveats that it's very easy to get into kind of a panic about this, an anti-China sort of xenophobic panic that would have implications for individuals, particularly mainland Chinese individuals in Canada, and we don't do sort of this guilt by association. It's very important.
Thank you very much, Vince. Emily. We've been silent.
Don't worry, David. No one can silence me. You gotta be kidding, my dear. Well, I agree with Vince. I mean, just don't overdo it. If the Chinese government's bad, doesn't mean all Chinese are bad. But I think it is very important for Canada to tell all the visitors, not just from China, all the people, that there is a code of behavior that you expect them to follow, whether it's in university or in business or in journalism or elsewhere. And I've been talking about that from Halifax now to Toronto. It's reciprocity. You go there, you do that, and they come here, you expect them to do the same. But how come? This is an open society, David. Their business people come, their journalists come, and their students come, their teachers come, and it's like open sesame. Everything is open. Not just to them, but to all the people who come here. But if you go there, gee, it's completely different. And you accept it. Why? Why do you accept it? Why does your government accept it? Why can't you demand reciprocal treatment, and not just Canada, but all the other countries? Why are all these countries so frightened? When they come, you give them everything. When you go there, you get nothing. You say, yeah, well, that's China, that's it. But of course, you do get something. What do you get? You get money. Money will blind you. Money makes the world go round. And money makes you blind. Money makes you frightened. So sometimes we talk about China. And actually, at the end of the day, David, we should talk about ourselves. What is it in us that make us have the courage to speak out or don't want to? Because there are other agendas. So, what sort of policy you want your government to adopt? Will you back your government? Or are you the people who keep lobbying, pressurizing Trudeau? Now don't do it, because we want to sell pork. We want to sell lobsters. We want to sell gas. And God knows what other things, ammunition, all the things you want to sell. Or you want to keep your dignity. Or you want to say, yeah, there are certain things we believe in, and we're not going to betray all that. So it's up to you. So I think, of course, the governments, we can scold them. But governments elected by you. You heard of the saying? The people get the government they deserve. You tell me, do you deserve Trudeau? No wonder it's a minority government. Whether you deserve it or not, you got him there already. So what to do? Well, you have to put some pressure on him to deliver what you want. Okay, sell the pork, sell the lobster, no problem. But also get what you want, so that the Canadian people can stand up. Just like Mao Zedong said, we all stand up. So David, it's actually up to the Canadian people. Although you are only, not 33, but 37 million. It's not a small number. So don't give me that number and say, can't believe we are so small, we can't do it. I certainly will not accept it. How small is Hong Kong? Only 7 million. We've been fighting non-stop for 6 months already. Do you want to do that in Canada? No.
We're just going down. Okay, so actually, I draw some of my comments from a contribution by David Mulroney recently on precisely this subject, where he observed that our options are substantially constrained. There's not a great deal we can do aside from a more vocal, more forcible, rhetorical response kind of in support of reform in Hong Kong and in support of some kind of viable reconciliation between all of the sort of parties to this ongoing conflict. So beyond that sort of recalling again the pre-1997 efforts of Canada to fortify Hong Kong against fears about its incorporation into the Chinese People's Republic. I think one of the key efforts was to, in fact, build ties between organizations, between universities, and on that point, I think rather than backing away from a situation that's been unstable, we should, in fact, sort of strengthen all of our existing relationships and ties as sort of building a kind of infrastructure. It's quite regrettable to me that we're recalling our students, obviously, over issues of safety and liability. We've canceled our Hong Kong Woodsworth program for the upcoming summer. I find all of this highly regrettable. And I think sort of strengthening our ties and strengthening our connections with our fellow Canadians in Hong Kong is the way to go.
Can I just wrap that up for 1 second? Thank you very much for that, Vic. And I just wanted to say that Emily was just the guest of the Larry Alford and Robarts Library, which has a wonderful program. And up on the 8th floor, a fantastic library where they've got all the key documents related to 1997 basic law. And it's one of the best repositories outside of Hong Kong for critical documents. So some things have been slowed down, but many remain, and the university itself is a great partner to do some of the things that we've talked about in supporting Hong Kong institutions. Thank you. I'm going to go to Kenneth. I'm going to deliver him the mic.
Actually. I'm sorry。我覺得加拿大咧，首先第一樣嘢要分清邊個係真正嘅朋友，邊個係。
I think Canada at first should determine who our enemies are and who our allies are.
首先第一個咧，加拿大同埋喺中加之間嘅貿易額咧，其實係只係佔7%到8%嘅啫。
Canada and Chinese trade, the GDP percentage is about 7 to 8%, a small amount only.
而同我哋嘅鄰居美國係80幾嘅。
And 80% with our US trading partner, therefore US is our friend.
所以我覺得我哋嘅所以我咧覺得咧，我哋如果係企喺我哋嘅價值觀相同嘅角度嚟講，
我哋 stand on common values，
我哋本身就應該同美國係企埋一齊。
We should stand with the United States of America more than stand with the values of Chinese。
其實個意義一樣嘅，等於咧中共咧點解成日去支持阿金肥仔嘅？
Why does the Chinese Communist Party support North Korean？
所以其實佢哋係一 group 嘅人，而我哋美加其實係一個同一個陣線嘅人。
Because China and Korea is one group, and Canada and the United States is one group。
咁我覺得咧嗱，啱啱提到話啲移民啊，同埋啲留學生啊嗰啲嘢咧，其實好重要嘅。
In terms of immigrants and foreign students, that's very important because
呢幾日咧，大家有冇留意到桂湖大學出咗一單事啊？
Did you see the news regarding Guelph University？
依家嗰啲咁嘅紅粉咧係，即係我講嘅係滲透啦。
Pro-Beijing fans in Guelph University, and leads to my discussion regarding infiltration。
佢居然要求加拿大嘅人喺加拿大嘅國土上邊講中文。
Asked Canadians to speak Cantonese when speaking to them, speak Mandarin, when speaking to mainland Chinese students。
咁另外一個咧就係我哋中國駐加拿大嘅新任大使。
The newly appointed Chinese ambassador to Canada。
佢係幾乎係用命令嘅口吻咧，同我哋嘅國家講，叫我哋唔好跟美國。
His tone of voice when delivering his message in Ottawa is to order Justin Trudeau to not follow the example of the US in terms of Canada's political stance towards China。
我唔明白作為一個主權國家嘅總理。
I don't understand why the Prime Minister's office or Prime Minister of Canada can
點解唔可以好強硬咁同佢講你干預緊我哋嘅內政呢？
cannot strongly tell the ambassador back or China back that they have no authority to influence our internal policies, to influence Canada's internal policies。
其實我哋都睇到啦，中國到處都話人去干涉佢嘅內政。
We all see examples of China influencing other countries' internal policies。
而我哋大家都睇到，其實係中共喺度干涉緊到處嘅內政，同埋我有一種講法係中共而家嘅意識形態同世界嘅各大宗教係宣戰緊嘅。
And we see signs that the Chinese Communist Party has their hands in every aspect of global affairs, especially in the area of religious gatherings and religion in China. They are trying to combat that, or quash.
I'm going to ask if we can just pass it on to Jeanette now, just to wrap up.
Yes, David 想大個人講嘢。
And again, Lynette, just your take on what Canada should be doing.
My take on what Canada should be doing. You know, I think all the police brutality, all the violence against protesters and civilians is unacceptable. And this is something that the Canadian government should definitely, you know, speak up against. And the fact that we have got 300,000 Canadians living in Hong Kong means that, you know, we have a stake in the conflict. That said, I would also urge, you know, I would also urge against, you know, seeing, you know, trade and human rights in kind of binary terms, because I think, you know, whether or not it's really binary is an empirical question. So if you do a regression of multiple countries and try to plot trade, degree of openness of their trade and economy and society on one axis, and human rights preservation on the other axis, I think over the long run, you see a positive relationship. Yes, there is some anomaly, and China is definitely an anomaly here. But I think overall, it might not necessarily be binary. And if we look at mainland Chinese people that I know of, you know of, you know, people around us, the fact that they could actually be studying, living in Canada today, meaning that, you know, they actually afforded at least economic rights that are given to them that were just unimaginable just a generation ago, and that has been progress. And that is not to say that you know, there are a lot of people suffering, and there's a lot of human rights violation. But you know, this is a very complex world. And I agree, and I also agree to disagree.
I'm going to shift. I'm going to move here so I can just quarterback the last part of our discussion, which is to open it up to audience members to ask questions. Ideally, if you have a particular panelist you'd like to ask a question of, you should direct it to them. If you have a general question, we'll do our best to get it to the right person. I see a lady with her hand up, please. And can you see if you can project down here? We have one mic.
David, did you want to collect a couple of questions for the purposes of time?
Yes, let's do that. Oh, thank you so much. So we'll take a couple of questions and then go to answers.
Thank you. Thank you, David. I'm Gloria Feng. I'm the president of Canada Hong Kong Link. I just want to let everybody here know that the U.S. administration has just signed the Human Rights and Democracy Act. So my question to the panelists is, would you support Canadian government in using the Magnitsky Law to sanction key officials and lawmakers of China and Hong Kong responsible for violation of human rights there? Freezing the assets, banning them as well as their family members from entry into Canada. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll take one more question. We'll go to answers and we'll go back again. The gentleman way at the back waving. Thank you. You're not just waving at me, you have a question.
Well,
first of all, I'm a nobody, so I'm a boomer. So the thing is, what I want to say is a statement that, Emily, you think that you are tired? We are tired too, right? So we follow the news. I echo what Kenneth said about that our media get infiltrated, because I don't watch those papers, the Chinese paper anymore. They're fake news. What I want to say here is, I see a lot of young people, and in my generation, we were brought up by the British. So, like, the Chinese government can say that you people are a British product, right? So you are not patriotic. But what about the young generation right now in Hong Kong? They were born, bred by the Chinese government. After 1997, why would they so rebellious? So I don't think, Kenneth, you should not afraid that those people that will be educated, the Canadian Chinese, to be patriotic in China. You look at what happened, right? So I want to send a message to our young people in here that you don't have to be patriotic to your skin. You are Canadian. You go back to your parents. Your country of your born, owe you nothing. So I would really like the panel to comment what I said. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's go to the panel now, and I'm going to very arbitrarily ask Vince, if he has a mic, could you address the first question about Magnitsky and whether that's something the Canadian government, we have the legislation, should that be a tool that the Canadian government uses to identify people who are acting against human rights in either Hong Kong or China?
To be honest, and maybe this will be surprising from somebody from international kind of human rights program angle, I'm on the fence a little bit about Magnitsky Act sanctions, and I'll tell you why. It's the purpose of it is, of course, a good idea in terms of providing some accountability for the actors responsible for alleged human rights abuses, generally of pretty severe kind of type. I am worried about, one, the efficacy of it, so you pass it, and then it's kind of, so what? Two, I'm concerned about its effect in sort of reifying this difference between Hong Kong people and mainland people in terms of its costs and benefits. Because if we, even let's say the US Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, it plays into that kind of new Cold War sort of mentality. And so there are consequences to that. And it also creates a wall in terms of supporting the kind of the mainland folks that do support the values of what Hong Kong protesters are fighting for, right? It really, I mean, and I've talked to a lot of people about this, there is really kind of no way out for Hong Kongers without some sort of mainland support in the long run. And so in this particular context, I have those worries. And another worry of individualizing systemic violations which are structural and therefore need structural political solutions. But there are sort of pros of Magnitsky sanctions. They do send a strong message. They do sort of hold some sort of even minor sort of accountability for folks that are identified as human rights violators. But because it comes from the perspective of a particular government, then it doesn't have the same sort of credential heft as some, for example, an international sort of institution is. But of course, there's difficulties in using those international sort of accountability instruments against Chinese and Hong Kong officials.
Thank you very much. Does anyone want to pick up on the second comment, really, in terms of how we engage diaspora communities and how we welcome them appropriately? Let folks mull that one over. We'll go to a couple more questions with this person with the scarf. Yes, thank you.
Sorry, say that again. Where are you?
Right there.
So I have a question in regards to what's next, right? As the saying goes, to make an omelet, you need to scramble some eggs. A lot of eggs have been scrambled in this whole process. In a protester environment where there are no leaders in this conflict, and in a government that is unwilling, seemingly unwilling to communicate to the other side, given the election results and given this potential for dialogue, is there dialogue? Is the central government willing to have a conversation with the people? Are the people able to communicate with the government? And is there a peaceful solution to this, given what has happened? And is this weekend going to be any different than the scores of weekends that have passed for the last 6 months?
Thank you. I'm going to ask Emily if she'd like to pick up on that one. And there's a mic right there.
You say, is there a dialogue? Obviously, right now there isn't. But the people will keep pressing for a dialogue. I mean, you do not just give up because there's no answer. You have to keep pressing, but neither do I think that you should just go out and break more windows and all that. But I think that, you know, people will continue to protest, and until we get an answer. That has been what's going on for months. We want a response, there's no response, and there's a protest, and the police beat people up, there's more violence, and then people protest, and there's no answer. So this cycle is going to continue. What else can you do? I don't think we want a revolution. They are not there to bring down the government like what people do in other countries. But still, the people will continue. That's why we want the international community to come out and help, because we may not have enough may not have enough power. That's why we need 67 statements from the foreign governments to tell the Chinese what to do. So this is it. And the Magnitsky Act, I think, is terrific. As David just said, the Chinese told you not to do it, and so you know what to do. I don't understand what Vince was saying. Maybe he should speak in Chinese. We understand it a bit more. But of course, I'm sure he's not an agent of China. But we have to make it more human so that we can understand why. Because they are very afraid of it. They are. And some people in America, they have sold their properties already because they don't want the assets to be frozen. And if you want something to strike the fear of God into them, that may be one of them. And I think Donald Trump has been forced into signing it. Why? Because members of both houses of Congress are so angry. I don't know what's the feeling of the members of your both houses. You are the voters. You have to tell your members of Congress what to think, instead of other people telling me, oh, Canadians, they don't care about foreign affairs, and they are very soft. They don't say nothing. I said, well, then you get the government you deserve.
Could I say a really quick rejoinder? And this is probably going to make me, pretty unpopular, but I'm really of the strategy of appealing to people, not necessarily states. And so we have to draw battle lines, but we have to draw them properly. And so if the number one issue that is currently facing the protest movement is that of police brutality, where do Hong Kong people get the strongest solidarity from if they reach out? Is it really from other states, or is it from community groups who have been facing police brutality and an unaccountable sort of police violence for decades? In 2014, in the Umbrella Movement, African-American folks from Ferguson had reached out in solidarity to Hong Kongers when they were facing tear gas and repression from their governments. And this line of solidarity is here all over the world. And then so, I'm not saying that the Magnitsky Act is of no use. Certainly it is of use, as David, you did point out, and Emily, you point out. But there is something here in terms of understanding the experience of oppressed peoples that Hong Kongers really need to delve into and haven't had a reason to delve into until only recently. And I really hope that if Hing Dai Pa San is to really be an embrace of diversity of tactics, that young Hong Kongers especially do that reaching out to oppressed folks from all over the world. And that's why I'm lukewarm, let's say, about some of the appeals to states. And I know that makes me very kind of unpopular on this panel, but I'll do that anyway.
Thank you very much. Just come, we're just going to hear from Kenneth and then I will go right to you.
我只係好 concern 一樣嘢咧，今日嘅香港咧，如果我哋加拿大政府處理得唔好，就係明日嘅加拿大嘅樣就係咁噶啦。啱啱呢位先生講話唔使擔心嗰個啲學生同埋啲下一代嘅，我覺得係唔會係咁嘅情況，因為佢哋咧其實嗰啲學生嚟到呢度咧。當然一邊接受緊加拿大嘅教育，但係佢同時係保留住佢哋原居地嘅嗰種思想嚟，其實影響緊我哋嘅。
Kenneth is very concerned that if Canada's stance is not strong enough, then the current example that's happening in Hong Kong shall become the future of Canada. So we should be aware that we are next. And to respond to the previous question regarding education influencing or infiltration affecting our Canadian students, it's still very important to note that as more and more foreign students come or foreigners come to Canada to become teachers, they might inadvertently, even though they don't want to, or maybe they're deliberately doing so, would bring their motherland or own country's value systems and ideologies into their teaching, and in that way affect our students, your children, Canadians who are born here, and might affect the way that they think.
我舉個例子啊，我喺電台工作嗰陣時咧，曾經喺節目嗰度訪問過一個前多倫多大學嘅女教師，亦即係你哋大學呢度嘅大學嘅女教師。咁講到中美中關係貿易前景同埋分析嗰陣時咧，我係好明顯感覺到佢希望佢個祖國啊喺呢場貿易戰入邊係勝出嘅。如果佢咁懷住咁樣嘅愛國心態咧，而忽略咗中美貿易戰背後所包含嘅意義，抑或價值觀衝突嘅意義咧，咁我覺得佢喺教學過程入邊可以有意無意咁將佢原居住國嘅意識形態同埋價值觀喺潛移默化咁影響緊個學生。
To give a very specific example, Kenneth interviewed on radio a former lecturer of the University of Toronto, and during the discussion the topic was to analyze the future of US-China trade. But during the dialogue, Kenneth clearly felt her desire for her motherland to win the trade war. And so Kenneth's point is, if the teacher carries this patriotism and ignores the meaning behind the trade war, that is, it's actually a conflict between Chinese values and Western values. That is what the US-Chinese trade war has become a symbol of, the conflict between Chinese values and Western values. But the teacher still has her blind patriotism, and Kenneth wonders that she could be intentionally or unintentionally influencing her students with her motherland's ideology and social values during the teaching process in a very subtle way. Thank you.
One last question. I'm going to go to this gentleman in the blue shirt. Thank you.
It's not a question.
Question.
I heard Figo Chen last night.
Yes.
I was very impressed. I'm 78. I've been active in the It's not a question. I heard Figo Chan talk last night in Cantonese, and would like you guys to hear from him. I have been active in the human rights and democracy movement in China for the past 40 years, and I don't believe I would be able to talk like him 23 years old when I was 23. So I want you to hear from him, and I want Mr. Yao's translator to help him if he wants to speak in Cantonese. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was exactly what we were going to go to. I've been asked to make a presentation to Figo when he comes out. You'll recall that he is with Emily, the recipient of the John McCain Award. This was just handed to me before. It's not something you will need here, but it may be it's something we identify you with. And so it's a respirator set and. That's the thing. So over to you, Figo.
Thank you.
都多謝呢個禮物，好好用嘅呢個真係。
Very useful indeed.
呢個獎呢係我手上呢個獎，其實係頒俾所有爭取民主自由嘅人。
The award that I hold in my hand is for all the people who have participated to fight for freedom and democracy.
我知道好多人好開心，見到美國總統簽署咗人權及民主法案。
I know that many people are happy that the U.S. government has passed a new bill.
但係喺同時間
But at the same time,
喺呢家嘅香港
in Hong Kong right now,
警察入咗理工大學，
the police are inside the Hong Kong Polytechnic.
而家亦都有好多人係告暴動罪。
And there are many who are accused of the crime of rioting.
政府依然未肯答應我哋嘅五大訴求。
The Hong Kong SAR government, Carrie Lam, has still not agreed to the 5 demands.
冇做任何嘅嘢去阻止警察去入去大學入邊。
Has not done anything to stop the Hong Kong police force to enter the sacred grounds of the university campuses.
我嘅朋友嘅眼
My friend's eye
已經冇咗，
has lost vision forever.
我朋友隻腳
My friend's leg
亦都唔會好得返。
can no longer be fully recovered.
冇人想死亡，冇人想受傷。
No one wants to die and no one wants to be hurt.
就好似我見到我嘅組織嘅召集人，
I saw the organizer conveyor of my organization
受咗重傷，
badly hurt
因為黑社會打佢。
because the triads attacked him.
喺香港係面對好多嘅困難。
Hong Kong is facing many difficulties right now.
但係其實喺加拿大都好面對住好多嘅困難。
Canada also faces different challenges.
我希望嘅係喺每一個國家嘅人都可以一齊去爭取民主、自由同埋公義。
I hope that citizens of many different countries can in their own way fight for democracy and justice and righteousness.
唔單止係同香港人企埋一齊，
Not only stand beside Hong Kongers,
仲要同自己企埋一齊。
also stand beside ourselves.
因為從來民主、自由、公義都係唔分國界嘅。
Because democracy, freedom has no borders.
可能喺呢度呢，好多嘅壞人，好多嘅人都會即係冇乜人理，因為可能爭取民主、自由、公義嘅時候，你見到可能喺中國亦都係一樣，都冇人理。
Perhaps many people of Asian descent in Canada and North America here are not doing much because they do not see that people in China are doing much.
但我希望嘅係佢哋明白，其實香港人同佢哋係企埋一齊嘅都係。
But I hope they will see and they will recognize that Hong Kongers and mainland Chinese people actually do stand side by side on the same side of democracy.
嚟緊我哋會好盡力，希望所有國家都似美國一樣。
In the coming days, we will try our best in the hopes that many other countries will also follow the example of the US.
去做一啲法案，
To pass some legislation,
去同中國講，
to communicate with China, send a clear message.
唔好再打壓任何嘅人。
Do not suppress, thank you, any other people.
亦都希望大家可以喺唔同嘅城市、唔同嘅國家都可以一齊努力。
And we hope that you who are in other cities and you who are in other countries can join together.
唔使擔心年青人，因為年青人仲有大家。
Do not worry about the young generation because the young generation has each other's back.
就好似我作為民陣嘅副召集人，
Like myself, Figo, who is a member of the Civil Human Rights Front,
我見住岑子傑俾人打嘅時候，我都好驚。
I see, what is his English name?
Jimmy Shang，
I see Jimmy Shang being attacked, brutally attacked.
但係我知道好多嘅人都係一齊同我企埋一齊嘅。
But I know many people stand by my side and my organization's side, on the side of democracy.
就好似卿姐抗爭咗幾廿年咁樣，係咪？
Like the Honorable Emily Lau.
只要大家都肯同年青人企埋一齊，只要大家都可以一齊努力，我相信我哋會爭取到民主嘅。
As long as you stand side by side with us, the young generation, we believe we shall be able to fight for and achieve freedom, liberty, democracy.
好多人問咧，就係究竟嚟緊點做？
Many people ask, what next?
相信群眾就係下一步啦。
I believe the crowd knows what to do. They're intelligent in this way.
Thank you.
The people, not the crowd.
Amazing. I just want to close this off by thanking this amazing panel, Tocha, Shishe. Thank you to U of T, various units, the Monk School for Global Affairs and Public Policy, particularly Peter Lowen, who put a lot of effort into helping us out. The International Human Rights Program, Vincent worked very hard on this, and the Faculty of Law as a whole. Thank you to other very committed organizers behind the scenes for this panel. Thanks to all of you for coming out and hopefully coming away with wider perspectives on what's going on and what role Canadians, to take up Vincent's theme, and Canadians might play. And finally, thanks to people like Figo Chan. Stay strong, Figo, but stay safe as well when you return. Good night, everyone.